Hello and welcome to Can Recruitment Crack Inequality, the show that Joe and I have probably been bringing for the last year or so, Joe. I should do more prep before these to figure out how long we've been doing it and how many sessions we've been doing. But Joe and I came together. We both have a huge passion for D&I, a huge passion for recruitment, and asked the question, can recruitment crack inequality? And we are broadcasting today on LinkedIn. Hello, welcome to our lovely LinkedIn audience. By all means, use the comments. We want you to connect on this platform, to share best practice, and also to ask us any questions. So come along with those, and also to the YouTube channel again. So I'm Sally. I'm the co-founder of Talent Included. We specialise in placing D&I leads and experts into organisations all over the world. Joe, what do you do?
What do I do? I'm really interested in how it's going for you. I've not asked that question yet. I hope it's going really well. I know loads of people, that the buzz that's been around the launch of the business, it's so exciting.
Yeah, very lucky.
Yeah, no, it's so cool, so needed. And so I work with recruiters, both agency side and in-house side. I help them connect their organization's overall ED&I strategy in with recruitment, talent attraction, and the whole hiring life cycle. I do it in a way, I do it through training and advisory work. As a recruiter who's been in the business for 23 years, 17 years actually on a desk recruiting, I do it in a way that makes sense to recruiters who have responsibility for their own desks and business and KPIs and targets and whatnot. And I kind of like, I work with them, take them on a journey to really understand how fair and ethical hiring can not only benefit them from from a success, from a career perspective, from a financial perspective, but it can also massively improve the candidate experience and the candidate journey. And I'm here for all those candidates that face barriers into work because of their identity, background and circumstance. My work is to help us as recruiters break down that stuff and make sure everybody's got equal access to work and successful careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And what incredible work that you do. And we've partnered before in a client capacity. And, in terms of having worked in the recruitment industry for so long myself, retraining and taking accountability for practicing inclusive recruitment practices is so vitally important for your own, ethical recruitment standards, but also to enable the organizations that you partner with to demonstrate those practices as well, because everyone needs to go on this journey. And I believe, to at the core of what we do, accessible, equitable and inclusive recruitment sets right at the core of that. But as you can see, we're not alone today. We're joined by the incredible Matt Ashby Cooper. I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a minute, Matt, and talk, tell us why we're here today and what we're going to be discussing. But I mean, you've got a really credible and illustrious career, 20 years in the D&I space and HR space. I want you to talk to us more about your organization and what you kind of stand for, but you really have got creating those inclusive spaces right at the core of what you do, and aligning that with kind of leadership capabilities. Is that right?
Yeah, a little bit. My strapline is helping organizations create inclusive spaces. Sometimes that's the leaders that I'm working with, and sometimes it's employees that I'm working with. I tend to start from one of either ends of the scale. So for some organizations, they really have no idea where they stand, and it might be about coming in and doing a temperature check and maybe an engagement survey around diversity and inclusion to help them understand where the pressure points might be and what things they could influence. For others, there'll be an idea of, we've got all that, we know what we're doing, and actually we need some training and some support either with our leadership around diversity and inclusion, or with our employees, and I'll go in and deliver training there. Quite often those clients end up switching around. So a client that says we don't know what we need ends up saying we need some training, and a client that says we need some training ends up saying, oh, actually we thought we were further ahead, or we didn't realize this was missing, so can we actually look at some of the temperature check piece as well. And then there's a third group of clients that tend to be larger, and they will tend to slot me in wherever they need to. So one of my key clients that I'm working with at the moment, there are 8,000 people in the UK, 80,000 globally. They know they cannot just wheel me out in front of everybody. So whenever there's a moment that's taking place, either an intervention or a conference, etc., they'll see what content's about, what the theme is, and slot me in wherever possible. So I literally did a piece last week around change management, and change management obviously requires some psychological safety. And then we talked about how psychological safety means different things for different people, and why might certain people struggle with psychological safety, and how can allyship then support that. And to be an ally, to understand the diversity and inclusion aspect. So it really does depend on what the client's looking for and how I influence, but really at the heart of what I'm doing is cultural change through that diversity and inclusion lens.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And Jo, what are we going to be exploring today?
So this is it's a really current and topical conversation. We've heard a lot of the negative rhetoric around ED&I over the last few months, with people that should know better and people that should know the power of their own voice and influence, talking absolute nonsense about this stuff. So and I don't like normally kind of like repeating the nonsense, but I think it's really, really important that we address it in conversations like this. So we're going to be looking at, DE&I overall. Is it being phased out? Is it a passing trend? Was it something that was really cool to do a couple of years when we had so much social upheaval? Is ED&I, DE&I, whatever acronym you want to use, is it dead? That's the big question, isn't it? So that's why I thought that bringing in somebody like Matt, who I know has some very, very clear views and some often holds a really sensible conversation around this would be a great option to explore. So I'm gonna like go straight in there with a question, Matt. Is D&I dead? Is this rhetoric useful? What's your feeling?
I think the likes of an Elon Musk would love it to be dead. Somebody who comes from a very privileged background and is a white male, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied person. I think he would look and say, I don't have any skin in the game. And actually, it needs to die because it's not doing me personally any favors. But I think that really denies the journey that D&I has been on. I think for a lot of people, they see it as that came out of Black Lives Matter, and that it was something that was being talked about 2 or 3 years ago. I went on my first ever D&I training course 30 years ago at Selfridges. I can't for the life of me think what it was called, but it wasn't diversity and inclusion. And that D&I acronym that you talk about, Jo, has evolved and changed over the years, right? It was inclusion training. It was diversity and equality. Equality became equity. Then it was diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then it was diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. You've got people out there with Jedi as their label, which I would love to take for myself, but that justice piece that is the J for me is very much about being a social warrior, and that's not really me, so I don't get to be a Jedi. But it's been a constant evolution, and to look at it and say, oh, it's dead, really denies that constant evolution that it's been there. And 30 years was my first training session, but it had been around for a good 20, 30 years before that, because it came from the Black liberation movement in the 60s. So, it's been a constantly evolving field, and to suggest that it's dead is crazy. Is it about to go through another period of evolution? I think it is, and I think that's necessary. But I don't think it's dead. Absolutely not.
No. Sorry, I was going to say, I completely agree. I mean, I've come from 2 days at the D&I Leaders Forum up in London last week. Firstly, I've got to say, for anyone who hasn't been, please go. Please go next year. It was really refreshing. I think sometimes working in the D&I space, it can feel quite lonely. It can feel quite intimidating. It can feel that you're, pushing a boulder up a hill. And if you take your eye off, it's gone and you've got to start again. We face so much resistance, which I think can really impact an individual's confidence level and resilience level when you're working in an in-house role or even in a consultancy role. And so and we had this discussion there, is D&I dead? Are we feeding into this kind of media storm? What role do we need to be playing in this? And I think what I took away from that event was, it's actually really incredible to be in a room with people that you're not trying to convince. We didn't talk about the why at all for 2 days. We just talked about the what, the how, the future, how D&I is evolving. We're going to talk about ESG and sustainability a little bit later on, but I can wholeheartedly say it's absolutely not dead. I think you're right, Matt, in terms of there is an evolution that is taking place. And I think it's an opportunity for us all, practitioners, experts, whatever we want to call ourselves, enthusiasts, to regroup and say, let's take control of this narrative, right? And let's figure out what we're going to use our voice for, right? Let's not fall into the you said, she said, I'm being othered, you're being othered. We have to have a polarized view on this, as well as everything else that's going on in the world. You have to have a stance on it, which is what I think really starts to push people towards having an uninformed opinion around something they don't necessarily understand. And I'm not being mean here. I'm saying you've got to be informed if you're going to have an opinion about something, but it's an opportunity for us to take back control and evolve D&I to the place where it needs to be, which is the strategic business case for D&I.
Agreed.
I'm just going to remove myself from my soapbox, take a deep breath, and pass the conversation back over to you. I mean, I can feel myself going then. So
I love it. I mean, you've obviously, to be in a room for 2 days and not discuss the business case, I mean, it just sounds like absolute heaven. I'm just so disappointed that I wasn't there. But I think that, there's a couple of really interesting points here, isn't there? I think that I think going back to what Matt said, so we were talking about this stuff, years before, 2020. I can remember working with Matt, and Matt was delivered the first session I've ever attended on being aware of identity and its connection with bias, and it was like absolutely mind-blowing. Still remember his slide deck from years ago, and this particular where he's talking about his own background identity, and everyone in the room was like, you said what? Yeah. And it was incredible. And I remember going to various Magic Circle law firms, going to the London Stock Exchange, sat around a table 7-8 years ago where employers were saying, as agencies, what are you doing around this? So I think it, as listening to some other people's perspective on this, which you've done, Sally, is always great. Sometimes we just kind of get in that, we think the only people having this conversation is on LinkedIn, and and it's often strongly connected to somebody's agenda. But I was having a conversation with Morgan Lobb from Vercida a couple of weeks ago, and it was like, it's just taken its natural position. We were always there. It's been around for decades, but there was this absolute rush for performative work off the back of the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and all the social inequality that we saw during COVID. And I think that triggered a lot of performative work. A lot of people kind of like, jumping on the bandwagon or recreating their commercial offering to address ED&I without possibly the credentials or the right intentions behind it. And just to kind of like finish on that point, I think it's really, really important that in this moment in time, people within the ED&I space actually collectively come together. In my opinion, I've seen a lot of critique. We're critiquing our own people. We're critiquing our own industry. We're trying to tear people down because they don't talk about everything. We are insisting that people stand up and take action on things that, when it comes to their professional area of expertise, where it's not something that they talk about all of the time. They stay within their lane and they talk about the thing that they have the most value with. So I think this is a moment in time where we need to stop the infighting Okay, accept that some topics are for people and others that they are not, and we, you know, and we show some solidarity for one another. Otherwise, I think we look at a bit, you know, it questions our integrity, I think, when we're tearing down other ED&I practitioners in this space.
Also, from an outsider's perspective, if you see ED&I practitioners fighting one another, critiquing one another, negatively challenging one another, and getting it wrong, and the danger of cancel culture within the DE&I community, how might I, as somebody who's trying to educate myself, trying to do the right thing, wants to be a bit of an ally, etc., but is terrified of getting it wrong, why would I ever throw my hat into the ring with those sorts of conversations? Why would I ever want to step up and put my head above the parapet as an ally? If I can see the people in the DE&I community getting it wrong and tripping up and getting the comeuppance for that kind of stuff, it's just, we've got to be kinder. We've got to allow more space for mistakes. We've got to allow more space for people to, you know, be a bit more authentic around how they question some of this stuff.
I completely agree. And talk to me about the fear piece, Matt, because you must see that a lot with the, you know, potentially the leaders that you're working with, potential people who aren't in that kind of, in those leadership roles. There is a fear of getting it wrong. Talk to me about how you create that space to explore other people's opinions and essentially what the outcome is when you have created that space.
I focus very much on my own experiences of getting it wrong. My brother was trans, and for years we would have to get our head around the change in pronouns, the change in gender, the change in name, that my mother would make mistakes on a regular basis. She'd be this tiger mom, this mama bear out in public defending him, challenging if somebody misgendered him, and occasionally would slip up herself, and that was okay. And my brother would give her space to do that. You know, of course you're going to make mistakes, mom. You're human, and you've had X amount of years of these pronouns, and now you've got X amount of years of these pronouns. It's going to take a while to change. I lean into my own experiences. I talk about the fact that I posted on Facebook and commented on Facebook about politics and about the numbers of people voting Tory who were over the age of 65. And I made a bit of a sweeping generalisation that maybe they should stop voting then. If it's affecting their pensions, they should stop voting for Tories. And somebody came back and said, actually, I'm over 65 and I don't vote Tory, and that's an assumption and a generalisation you're making. And I had to sort of sit with my feelings for a moment and go, oops, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I should know better than that. And so I've gone back and commented and gone, I own that, you're absolutely right, I shouldn't have made those that generalisation. Here's actually what I meant to say and what I should have said. And I talk about this in training, right? I talk about the fact that I make mistakes. I call myself a practitioner, not an expert, deliberately, because I'm not the finished article. I might just be further ahead in the journey than some other people. I've got an interest and a passion in this, so I read about it more than other people might do. And I create that safe space for people to get it wrong. I talk, Joe, that the slides you talk about, where I talk about my own background and my own ancestry. So I talk about the fact that I'm mixed heritage, and my great grandfather came from Barbados, and I show photographs of my dad and my great granddad and all that kind of stuff. And I then show my own bias results when I looked at a bias test for light skin over dark skin, and I had a moderate preference for light skin over dark skin. So the strongest you can get is a strong preference, and then you've got moderate preference underneath that, right? With my heritage, with my background, I still had a moderate preference for light skin over dark skin. And I use that as a means of getting people to go, if this guy stood up in front of us, can talk about his trans brother and how family misgendered him, if he can talk about his own mistakes on social media, if he can talk about the fact that even with his heritage, he's got this initial bias that he's had to work against, then it's okay for me to explore that too. And it's okay for me to acknowledge that I've got work to do as well. And that's the way I approach it, really.
Interesting, really, really interesting. And I think, yeah, I think it is creating that safe space. Talk to me about the companies that you work with, and in terms of how they position you coming in. We talk about the business case, we talk about, you know, moving beyond having that business case conversation. But I'm really interested to know, you know, if we're talking to an organization out there who are the beginnings of that journey, what typically how do they position you coming in? What are they trying to achieve?
It really depends. For some, it's more subtle. For others, it's more live and direct. However, in both instances, it would be strategic, and there's a strategic alignment. This is why we're doing it. It's going to make us more money. It's going to make us more commercial, etc. So for some, one of the very first organizations I worked with had a long-standing client of theirs. They've been working with them for 9 years. They made lots of money together, lots of placements with them. The client loved them. And they'd done a review of their ESG piece and said, our suppliers have to be committed to this diversity and equity inclusion piece, and there has to be a visible commitment to it. And my client were white, middle class, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual, to a person, all 30 of them, not a large organization. And so when it came down to it, they'd not done any of this work. They'd not done anything whatsoever because they felt they had no skin in the game. And suddenly here they are not even losing a tender, being told, you can't pitch for this because we know that you don't do anything on this already. Yeah. And so they come to me and said, we need help. We want to do it. We know that we should be doing it, but we felt so disconnected from the message that it felt inauthentic to say we're going to start doing this stuff because we don't have any skin in the game. And so now we're doing it because we've lost out on some money, and that doesn't feel great for us. But internally, they've sold this as we need to evolve. We need to evolve to be able to keep these clients. We need to evolve to be able to suit our market, and that's why we're bringing somebody in. So some of my clients will start there. One of my key clients that I adore and love working with are really savvy about the fact that they're a very big business, that they can't get me exposed to everybody in the organization. There are 8,000 people in the UK, 80,000 globally. And so instead, they look at opportunities to bring me in and align me with the strategy of different areas. So I just did some work for the finance conference with them, and their finance function is going to go through a massive amount of change, lots of AI, lots of new systems. And so we looked at change management, and I did a piece around change management, how to become a change agent. What do you need to be able to work easily within a changing environment? And that's psychological safety, right? This ability to be able to push back and challenge and be honest about when you're making mistakes or getting things wrong. And then we talked about the fact that psychological safety can be problematic for different people from different backgrounds. Are there certain sorts of people who might struggle to access psychological safety? And from that, we then moved into this diversity and inclusion space. So for those organizations, they know that they can drop me in to talk about things that are very strategically aligned and aligned with what's going on in those departments right now, and just bring in this diversity and inclusion lens to be able to look at them through.
Yeah, really fascinating, really, really fun. And I think it's really interesting that you touch on that change management piece. That's what D&I is. D&I is driving a change agenda. Whatever you link it to, I think it's really, we're seeing a huge uptick in the weighting that's put on bids and tenders around D&I, ESG, sustainability. Huge weighting. Some organizations put a weighting of up to 30%. So you're right, if you haven't got this kind of authentic strategy that you're developing, wherever you are on that journey, the first step is to create a strategy and take yourself on that journey. But I think it's interesting that, if an organization was going through a change journey to, embed a new system that's going to drive productivity, or upskill their colleagues that's going to give them the cutting edge on the market. Everyone kind of rolls their sleeves up and goes, right, okay, let me dive in. Of course, there's a bit of resistance to change, but let me dive in. I think it's interesting that as soon as you start putting a more kind of social lens on it, why do we then start getting more resistance? Social impact.
I think it's an interesting observation, and to treat it more like a change management process, I think, where we look to drive people's buy-in and commitment to it first, I think would be the way to go. I think we assume that there's buy-in and commitment. We assume that people understand that there's a moral imperative to do some of this stuff, and therefore they want to be on the right side of history, and therefore they're going to get on board. And actually, for a lot of people, I think they struggle with it because it's change. There's fear of getting things wrong. That people don't like change. People don't like to be called out. People don't like to be told that they're wrong, and they focus on the negative aspect instead of seeing it as a positive change that's likely to have a positive impact on productivity. My own personal career might flourish and grow and blossom because of it. You know, I might get more opportunities. They don't see the benefits for themselves or for the organisation. All they see it is this negative change and the fear of it.
What do you think, Jo? What are your views? What have you kind of seen? How have you seen this play out?
I think more organisations are actually they're getting comfortable with the fact that this is about it. Like we've said, it's about change management, and I think that's where we might see the biggest change. A move away from those like one-off interventions and initiative-led ED&I that we see, you know, the events, the podcasts, the kind of categorized employee resource groups, perhaps. And for those that just did the initiative-led ED&I think that we are seeing a reduction in that and organizations turning the tap off. And it could trigger a bit of a panic for ED&I professionals, my one-off workshop, the unconscious bias, the event that they wanted me to speak at, all that stuff's disappearing. But I think we're seeing the organizations that do see this as a culture, ethics, behavior change piece of work, that they're moving towards the deeper work. They want to work with people like Matt and myself and you as a talent partner to support them through a change management piece over a year, 6 months, whatever that might look like. And I think that's also supporting this move away from just looking at soul identity groups, where we're not just focusing on women, we're not just focusing on race and ethnicity. We're actually recognizing that the spectrum of diversity is incredibly broad, and therefore what we were doing a year ago when we were really driving the gender agenda, it's not serving us. So we need to look at this like holistically and through that intersectional lens. And that's why I'm pivoting, right? I've made a decision to move away from one-off interventions. And I'm strengthening and building out my long-term change management advisory and training piece, where I will deep dive with those organizations looking to evolve their entire recruitment life cycle. And, will it be painful? It could be, but I prefer to work with organizations who are prepared to put in a shift to really see the results in the future.
And I think that's not just a D&I challenge. I think it's a business change challenge. If you think about, picture yourself sat in a middle management role or senior management role, the macro economy is shifting and making you do this and this, business, directions and strategic visions are changing all the time to react to what's going on externally. That word initiative is, this is the initiative. This is the initiative. I was one of the interesting speakers that we had at the event was someone from Merlin Entertainment. And they said, actually, we weren't going to get any engagement from their management because of the word initiative. And they said, well, if I just ignore this email and if I just don't answer the phone to you and don't turn up to that training, I can go under the radar, because within the next 4 weeks, you're going to be setting another D&I initiative and another one and another one. And I think everyone, you talk about D&I fatigue, everyone's exhausted because you're trying to be everything to everyone. If you're a sole D&I practitioner really within an organization, it's a huge responsibility. And as soon as the business starts waking up to, my goodness, we are actually doing things authentically, everyone starts putting their hand up. We need to do this. We need to do this. And it becomes like this big noise, overwhelming noise. I think you're right, Jo, in terms of what we're seeing is the initiatives are going, and it is absolutely this deep change work to say, right. And I don't think that we necessarily need to move away from, you know, single groups, but if we can get a gender equity program designed, delivered, and more importantly, embedded in an organisation, and going back to your point, Matt, understanding what the kind of key challenges are, how we're going to get people on board, how we're going to engage in, you know, these stakeholder groups, so they're going to embed the change. Once we've done it and we've actually got success and we've got some outcomes that we can measure that success against, brilliant. That's how we do it. That's how we do D&I change management with this organisation. This is what we learned. This is what didn't work. This is what we need to put in more investment on. You know, is it the communications piece? Is it the embedding phase? Did we do it over too long? You know, I'm babbling now. But what I'm trying to say is, once you've got that right and you've got that partnership, whether that be external or internal, then we can start really having some impact within the D&I space. Another question. Right, talk to me about, because I'm really conscious about time. Half an hour in already. Now, talk to us about the links to ESG, the links to sustainability. I've obviously got some views on this, having done both these roles myself before. Well, where do you think the kind of conversation is going in terms of the linking of the two, D&I and either sustainability or ESG in the workplace?
I might be a bit controversial on this one. I have concerns about it being part of the ESG agenda. And obviously it fits in there, right? So you talk about the social aspect of ESG, and it's about worker relations and workers' experiences in the workplace, and it's health and safety and diversity and inclusion, etc. It's all in there, right? It's definitely in there. I've seen clients who get very focused on the ESG label, whether that's B Corp or otherwise, and getting and attaining that label becomes really important. And attaining that badge becomes really important. And then there's this mad dash scramble after having achieved it to go, oh, we've said that we do these things. We've said that we do the diversity and inclusion piece. Now we need to actually action it. And it's not coming from a place of authenticity. It's kind of similar, Joe. We've had conversations previously about diversity and inclusion awards and the idea of organizations going for an award. Don't do it for the award. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because it's at the core of your DNA. Let's get it done, and do it from a place of authenticity, not because I want that B Corp label, not because I want to win that award for something. And I'm concerned that instead of focusing on the values of the organization, instead of focusing on what we're looking for within this organization as far as expectations of behaviors and standards and the way that we treat one another and communicate and respect and what that looks like, I feel like too often we're focusing on this label of ESG, we're focusing on this label of B Corp, and that stops us doing some of that work, because it becomes a bit of a tick box exercise.
Joe, over to you. What are your thoughts?
I don't disagree. I mean, we're constantly battling against authenticity and, trying to move away from that kind of performative ED&I work. And gosh, with the latest focus on B Corp and the ESG requirements and stuff, I mean, it feels like it's almost like just another box to tick, right? I'd like to think that having B Corp status or being very, very visible in your ESG work, it's almost, there's a lot more accountability, and there's also a lot more transparency around it, because I would like to think a lot of this is really, really measured. And if you if you don't deliver year on year, whatever status you've won, I would like to think that gets taken away from you. Yeah, so look, I'm all about, I'm really, really thinking about the future and thinking about, what is going to make organizations really still commit to the ED&I agenda. And I guess with my, commercial brain on, I'm always thinking about, what language do I use? Do I move away from ED&I and do I talk more about fair and ethical recruitment? because no one's ever going to say, are you interested in talking about fair and ethical recruitment? No one's ever going to say, oh no, that's not for us. But if you say, do you want to talk about ED&I, they openly say, no, that's not for us. And so I think so. If an organisation is out there very visibly and openly talking about its ED&I, its ESG commitments, or its Corp B status, then I'm going to be like, oh, so what does that look like from your commitment to your people from a social perspective? What does that? I'm looking at how we make sure that they address ED&I on that journey.
And from a practitioner perspective, we need to be sensitive to that. We absolutely do. And how do we engage with our clients, and what language is going to work to engage them? We absolutely do need to be considerate of that. I go back to this double-sided coin of corporate authenticity and corporate vulnerability. I recognise, and Joe, you mentioned this about me earlier on, I'm quite practical when it comes to this kind of stuff. I recognise that businesses are there to make money. That's their fundamental MO, right? And I'm real about that. So when it comes to setting goals and targets around diversity and inclusion, corporate authenticity is really, really important. You cannot say that you're going to aim for a goal of this unless you're truly committed to doing the work that's needed to achieve that goal. So I can think of my own experience working in an organization where we'd done a great deal of work around diversity inclusion and what it means for us, and standards of behaviors, etc., etc. And when it came to dealing with the very senior person who was bullying people in his team along the lines of gender and race, we did nothing. And it was too senior a person. We weren't ready to have that conversation. It was too hard a basket. And so we didn't bother dealing with it. And the message that's sent internally within the business is everything we said about the commitments to D&I, not true. Everything we said around policies and standards, expectations of behaviors, not true. Because if you were a certain person within the organization, you'd get away with it. So from an organizational standpoint, when it comes to setting your targets and goals, if you say we want to have 50% women in the business, what are you going to have to do to get there? And are you genuinely committed to doing the work to get there? If you say these are standards around bullying, harassment, etc., etc., this is our red line. Are you really going to hold to that red line when push comes to shove? Because if you're not, you're going to undermine all the work that you're doing. That corporate authenticity piece is really important. And that, for me, is more important than whether or not I've got a certain status, whether or not I've got certain accreditations.
I get that. I think for me, having, like I said earlier, worked in that role, I think ESG and B Corp for me are two very different things. I think a B Corp status is a status. It is something you aspire to, and not relevant and applicable to every organisation. But I think for me, it puts a stake in the ground in terms of this is what we stand for. So we want to work with, and a lot of people want to work for purpose-led businesses, right? If you want to go work for a B Corp tick, green tick, you're in. I think whether you call it ESG or sustainability, I think those two terms are very much interchangeable. I think from an ESG perspective, it's very much centered around kind of governance and reporting. Now, interestingly, having developed an ESG strategy myself, I get what you're saying, Matt. You have to, there has to be some authenticity behind what you're doing. If you're going to put it in writing, okay, and it's going to be published in an annual report, that kind of comes back to the corporate reporting side of the argument, then absolutely you need to, be putting your money where your mouth is. What I do think it enables, though, is for businesses to have very well thought out strategies, because they're like, okay, we've got a year to prove, and we're on a quarterly reporting cycle, a quarter is a very short amount of time. We've got to prove that we're actually doing this stuff. I think where I've seen businesses fall short and where we've come in to support them is they've made these very public claims, targets, quotas, goals, whatever you want to call them, okay? And then there's absolutely no substance behind it. Okay. Now, but what I think organizations, this is where support comes in, and support, from organizations like you, Matt, is we've said this and we're nowhere near where we need to be. So we need to do something about that. That's where the kind of deep change work bit comes in. But what I think it does, it's almost a chicken and egg situation. What it does then do for organizations who choose to go down that route is to provide governance, which is the G, right? It is to provide governance to say, right, we have said this is what we stand for. We are a purpose-led business, and these are our kind of standards, you know, competencies and standards that we hold ourselves to. So when employee X does start to behave out, you know, out of line, whether they're in a senior leadership role or not, it actually gives the business something to hang their hat on and say, we've said this, you're behaving like this, we can hold you to account now. So I think sometimes in an ideal world, yes, it'd be great to have all of our ducks in a row whilst we're writing the stuff, but it does provide a framework to be able to refer back to and help develop behavioural competencies within the organisation and policies. Because what organisations could say is, yes, you know, gender equity is something that is at the core of our values, and then we look at the family-friendly policies and we realise that actually, you know, so I get what you're saying, but I think some of it can be a little bit chicken and egg, and some of this more compliance focus can really start driving that operational change because it starts to scare boards to go, we need to be putting our money where our mouth is. The final point on this for me is I wonder whether within certain organisations there is going to be a change of reporting line for ED&I leads, and it's going to be moving away from HR and more into a kind of more a compliance or a head of ESG or a head of sustainability, because I think where some organisations fall short is it's seen as an HR job to do, whereas actually we know to embed that change, it needs to sit holistically across the whole organisation. So my final thought.
Article I read yesterday actually that talked very much about that, and it was talking about a panel that had taken place and different people on this panel talking about that very topic. And I think you're right, it needs to be devolved away from HR being responsible for it. And I think while there may be an individual that's responsible for coordinating these things or holding the business to account on some of these things, maybe reporting back on some of these things, I'd even go one step further and say that where I've seen this work really well is where managers and team leaders will have some sort of responsibility around diversity, equity, and inclusion that's measured as part of the competency framework.
Yeah.
And that when you see it happening at that level, that's when you start to see real commitment to the change, because those managers and leaders have a vested interest in being part of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think without that, you end up with all you're really doing is moving this responsibility from HR to another individual who's solely responsible for driving. So you've got to have it embedded through the rest of the organization. And that's not just competency frameworks as far as role profiles are concerned, but performance criteria, promotional criteria, even financial reward. So around things like bonuses, etc. Only when you really see things embedded at that level do you really see the managers actually driving some of that change that you want to see.
Interestingly, Microsoft do exactly that. So Microsoft, for every single employee, regardless of level, there has to be a D&I commitment that they are reviewed on into part of their performance review, and part of their annual bonus is attached to that. Now, for me, that screams accountability and commitment. It's not just managers or leaders. It's, you know, and it could be anything from, you know, in this next 12 months, I want to learn more to become an ally of said group. And these are the steps I'm going to do to get myself there. So it could even be like an education piece, it could be an allyship piece, it could be like a champion piece, whatever. But I think that, to me, is commitment and accountability.
Absolutely.
I'm really conscious of time, Joe, really conscious of your time too. Last thoughts from you both, please, in terms of what are the biggest challenges that we face in the industry at the moment, and what should every D&I practitioner be prioritising for the remainder of this year? I can't believe we're halfway through the year. So the remainder of 2024, come on, what's going to have the biggest impact?
I think from a practitioner perspective, we need to be keeping it inclusive. So I think we leave half of our audience on the table a lot of the times when I've spoke to a lot of clients who will say 75% of our employee population are white, male, cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual men. I think I've ticked too many boxes there. And as such, they feel disconnected from the D&I message. We've got to create inclusive conversations. We've got to be talking about why those members of the audience have skin in the game too. I don't think Elon Musk is authentic. I don't think he does get to be authentic. I don't believe anybody's that much of a dickhead. Am I allowed to say that? he's not necessarily able to be authentic, right? So I want to be able, we have to be having inclusive conversations that explain why those people who are also not able to be authentic about their mental health, not able to talk about their desire to support their families better, that they want to be able to take on more of the unpaid work in the household. They want to be able to talk about their fears as well as their aspirations. If you're not able to do that in the workplace, then this system doesn't work for you either. We've got to be more real about those conversations and bringing those people into that conversation. And then the one thing to the second part of the question that I think we need to be thinking about, or that we can do to get greater leverage, would be keeping it strategic. So plugging in that D&I conversation wherever it attaches to the strategy of the business, whether that is because we're going through periods of change, or because we're trying to create a more collegiate culture, or getting people to collaborate more effectively, etc. Looking at where we can put this D&I conversation into the mix from a strategic perspective.
Love that. Fantastic. What about you, Joe? What are your views?
I agree with like what Matt said. I think it needs to be an everybody conversation. I think we're creating two camps, right? We're creating the camp of people who are marginalised. Then we're creating a camp of people who don't realise that they're marginalised, but they may be, and then people that three camps: people that that don't see themselves as being marginalised and don't think they're allowed to be in this work. And this is, we're viciously pushing that group away. And I believe that that's to the detriment of the work, because ultimately those groups tend to, as far as last time I could see, were in positions of power and authority. And I just think the debates around at the moment are vicious. That people are feeling like that, that they're feeling like they're being blamed, and I don't think that plays a part in in any of our work. That's not healthy. I think there needs to be, I'd like to see more metrics brought in and more measurement. I think it's notoriously difficult, isn't it, to deeply measure the long-term impact of the work that we're doing. Yes, there are traditional metrics that we use and measurement tools that we use, but I think we really need to kind of drill down and focus on where we were at and where we're now at, and what that looks like for the business, and be careful in terms of how we communicate that. I think it's really important that we set, leaders, managers, goals that are integrated with their performance and reward, to create accountability. But often I see that happening, and where this falls down time and time again and creates internal conflict in organizations. If we go, hey, this is this new set of rules that you need to abide by.
Yeah.
The reasons why, or how to do it. And it's just like, that person just hears, if I don't employ or promote this group, I will earn less money. Never going to work. Internal conflict, and it again creates that pushback. And it all boils down to, that kind of education piece, right? We're expecting our organizations to think and feel and behave in completely different ways, and yet the number one thing that's missing is we want change, but we're not prepared to invest in training. We're not prepared to invest in education. We haven't got time for it. And until we have time and resources for education and training, I think we're going to struggle.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think for me, it's embedding. Don't start anything new. Let's just practice embedding what we're on, the journey that we're on. And to your point, Matt, leaving people. Is it paper on the table? Is that the expression that you use?
I said people on the table. Part of our audience on the table.
Well, whoever's on that table, let's get on their level. Let's spend time engaging. Let's spend time not othering ourselves or others. And let's spend time to create coalitions within organizations. So we're not, living in this polarized world. It doesn't have to be my argument and your argument. Let's actually just have open discussions and create the time to do that, because that is what is going to accelerate progress, not coming up with a new initiative every 5 minutes. So, we're out of time. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. You've got my D&I juices flowing. We all love. I love the visual. Matt, thank you so much for your opinions, your wisdom, your experience. We will put some notes on how you can get hold of Matt and his amazing work. And yeah, take some time to create some inclusive, spaces in your organisation, and hire Matt to come in and do it for you. If you're looking for your next D&I job, I'm your girl. If you're looking to hire your next D&I expert, lead, practitioner, manager, I'm your girl. And if you want someone to come in and show you how to run an inclusive recruitment campaign, practice, and embed that so you are attracting, retaining, and developing diverse talent, Jo is your lady. Anything else to add, Jo?
It's been a really interesting session. I think it's an important conversation that we had. Matt's wisdom is always incredible, always putting some really good content out on LinkedIn that gets you really thinking. And yeah, no, thank you. Thanks so much, Matt.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sally.
Speak to you all soon. See you later. Bye.
Bye.